I'm alone in the sentiment that the world has changed drastically since 2020. And I believe that one of the biggest ways that the world has changed is in our desire and the pursuit for fame. At one point in time, it felt almost impossible for somebody to transcend from being, just an average regular person to having their moment in the limelight. But I feel that for a multitude of reasons, fame has been easier to pursue than ever before. But a lot of this, I feel like, comes from the fact that we were conditioned to want fame since we were young. So today I want to explore some things that I believe led to us wanting to be famous, Gen Z specifically, how this created the perfect storm in 2020, and what this means for the future. So in order to answer these questions, I wanted to go back to what I feel like is the beginning. Some of the first things that we were exposed to when we were young, which were TV shows, specifically on Disney and Nickelodeon. These two networks specifically, I felt like dealt with so many concepts and ideas that had to do with fame. And I feel like these were honestly the two most popular networks of that time. If you go back and you look at them, specifically starting in 2003, because this is where I believe they started to target the Gen Z audience, because their demographic was from ages 6 to 14. And if Gen Z began in 1997, then by the time 2003 rolls around, we would have been in that age demographic. And so just a little disclaimer, of course, there could have been shows that came out before this time period that we either watched when we weren't their target demographic, or we saw like a rerun of it later on. And that could have, influenced or conditioned us in a way to pursue and desire fame. But solely for this, I wanted to just look at the shows that I know for certain they made with the intention of it being seen by us. So with that being said, I broke it down into 4 categories, and there definitely is some overlap, but by and large, this is kind of what made sense to me. So category 1, this is dealing with a show or a movie in which one character was pursuing a goal, and if they became successful, fame would be granted as a byproduct. So here we have things such as, Cheetah Girls 1 and 2, Big Time Rush, Sunny with a Chance, Shake It Up, Lemonade Mouth, Sharpay's Fabulous Adventure, Jessie, and Let It Shine. Category 2, this is a show or a movie in which at least one character was already famous or was newly famous. And this deals with things such as Stuck in the Suburbs, Hannah Montana, The Naked Brothers Band, Camp Rock, The Cheetah Girls One World, Jonas, Starstruck, Camp Rock 2, So Random, and Liv and Maddie. Category 3 deals with a show or a movie in which there was some form of like a digital, or what we would now consider like an influencer component. And so for this, I have iCarly, Good Luck Charlie, Austin and Ally, Dog with a Blog, and Bizarre Vark. I know that one's kind of like a little bit out there, and I definitely feel like that one is for like younger members of Gen Z, but still. And finally, category 4, this is in which there is some type of performing arts component. So this includes High School Musical 1, 2, and 3, Victorious, and How to Rock. After looking at all these shows and looking at, the time frame in which these came out, I saw some things that I thought were kind of interesting. One being is the runtime. If you look at it, like if you go back and you look at like the little graph, at least for me, the shows had been running since I was born up until I was aged out of Disney's target demographic. And that's really important because by the time I aged out, there was already things going on online that now kind of I felt took that place of the conditioning for fame, or not necessarily took its place, but was an extension of that conditioning. Number 2, the shows went from a larger form of stardom to something that now we would see as more realistic. So for example, when Hannah Montana came out and we're looking at, being a pop star, that seemed back then like something that was so out of reach and so almost impossible to obtain. But now if you look at the last show that I had on there in chronological order speaking, which was Bizarre Vark, you will see that that deals kind of with an influencery component, right? They were making videos, they were putting it up online. And so of course I feel like this is just because this was keeping up with the times, right? They're making the shows, they see what's happening in the real world, so they're incorporating these new components of digital life. And so the next point that I found interesting is that I feel like these shows were mainly marketed towards girls. Like I said, I only looked at Disney and Nickelodeon because I found that these were the two channels that really dealt with, these concepts that had to do with fame. And when I looked over at Disney's other channel, which was Disney XD, that was totally marketed towards boys, by the way. They only had one show that I felt like could have been on this list, and that was I'm in the Band, which aired in 2009. And so, that was kind of just interesting to me because are they doing this because they know for sure boys don't care about fame? But I'm also like, maybe boys just didn't care about fame as much in that way, right? Maybe boys kind of desired more to be famous, not for being like a pop star or a singer. Maybe it was more beneficial for boys to want to pursue fame through being something like an athlete. And then finally, the thing on here that I just found the most interesting, which I kind of already hypothesized before I even began doing research, is just everything surrounding Hannah Montana. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of my childhood and when I think of Disney as a whole, sometimes before I even think about like the castle or Mickey, or actually I take that back, when I do think about the castle and Mickey, I also think about Hannah Montana, kind of all in that order, because to me, Hannah is Disney Channel, and Disney knew that. And I believe that the success of Hannah Montana totally snowballed into something much bigger. So UCLA has a department that's called the Center for Scholars and Storytellers. And every 10 years since 1967, they have been conducting a study in which they look at the most popular tween shows, and then they have the group rank the values of these shows. In 2007, the most popular tween shows, according to this study, were Hannah Montana and American Idol. Regarding the values that they ranked, what do you think was the number one value that they believed these shows were expressing? If you guess fame, you would be right. And if you look at that study in years prior, that was not the case. Aside from that study and just kind of my own agreement and hypothesis regarding the situation, there was a woman named Chloe Stephanie. In her article, Our Generation's Obsession with Fame, she explores the topic of why were so many of our shows as a kid dealing with fame. And she has a lot of, interesting stuff in her article. But the one thing that really stood out to me that I also kind of speculated myself is because these shows were extremely profitable. These TV networks, one of the ways that they get paid, and one of the biggest ways that they get paid, is through their commercials and their ads. So if you're a kids channel, I feel like that already limits you to the types of ads that you can have anyways. You can really only market things that kids can play with or kids can eat. And if I'm not mistaken, Disney Channel especially was a lot more rigid in the types of commercials it would have compared to like Nickelodeon. I feel like Disney was always constantly promoting things that only were related to Disney. And so once again, that's really gonna limit you to the amount of money from other companies that you can get. So with this in mind, when you have a show that's about a pop star and the show's doing really well, not only do you now have a show that a lot of people are watching, so therefore, you can ask companies and advertisers, hey, you need to pay me more for your commercial break during this show because we have a ton of eyes on the screen. But you also can be like, well, why don't we start creating merch, right? Toys, pajamas, and you know what? She sings, so let's have her make CDs. Matter of fact, let's have her go on tour. Matter of fact, let's have her own blockbuster movie. And I feel that because of the success of that, and this is what Chloe Stephanie was getting to, that inspired Disney and even Nickelodeon to create more and more things that followed this pattern of fame and superstardom, because there were just so many ways that you can monetize off this. So even if it wasn't their intent for us to desire fame, nobody was sitting there like, oh, I'm going to make this so that kids grow up wanting to be famous, so that kids grow up wanting to be a star. I think that it was more likely to assume that they just saw the success of these shows, and as they kept coming out and coming out and coming out, that just over time kept gradually planting seeds in our head that this was something to aspire and dream to one day happen to us. And going back to the study where they were looking at Hannah Montana and American Idol, it's safe to say that these were not the only shows that were influencing us. I would honestly argue that even more than these shows, right, that were on Disney and that were on Nick, I feel like the reality TV is the pinnacle of wanting to be famous. Like that study showed, the main value that the audience picked up when they were watching Hannah Montana and American Idol was fame. So even if you, let's say, were just going on Survivor because you wanted the experience of seeing if you could win. You wanted the money. You didn't really give a crap that like you were gonna potentially have, your 15 seconds of fame. You just wanted to do it just to do it. That's not always how it comes across to the audience, at least. They're looking at the bigger picture. They're looking at the whole package of the concept of the show, which they felt was just fame. And like I said, I didn't look at other channels aside from Disney and Nickelodeon because I felt that the other channels didn't really have a lot of stuff that could kind of fit into these categories. But Cartoon Network did have their cartoon titled Total Drama Island, and this was pretty much a parody of Survivor. And if you've ever watched the show, their theme song literally opens up with the line, and so this just proves my point that no matter what the intent of going on these reality shows were, it still comes across to the audience like you are desiring fame. So where are we now, right? Let's set the scene. Imagine you're getting up in the morning and maybe you're watching one of these shows before school. Or maybe you're being a good kid and you're not doing that and you're just going to school and you're coming home and now you're watching a show that's dealing with this. And then maybe in the evening, you and your family, you're sitting around, you're eating dinner, and now you're watching an episode of American Idol or you're watching Survivor. You've kind of just throughout the day been planting little seeds in your head of fame. Let's throw in, the music that is dealing with themes of fame and the games that are also dealing with the same, and you're sprinkling those in, and you're doing that once again for days and weeks and months and years. Where does this lead us? It's almost like we had this perfect foundation for what I think is the next piece in the puzzle, and that is social media. I feel like when YouTube first came out, we were watching these YouTubers before they were even given that name, right? We were just watching somebody, a person with a camera, either talking about something that they loved or just being really funny and having a good time on the internet. It felt very simple and in retrospect, almost innocent, because it's like we didn't know what opportunities and monetary gains could come from doing something like that. And I think as things began to change, we might have individually seen somebody that we watched begin to have these opportunities. Like for me, I remember watching Mac Barbie 07 on her trip to Japan that YouTube was paying for, and her collaboration with Arrow that really made me feel like I was watching in real time the transition of someone just being a regular person on the internet to entering some form of stardom. But I think collectively, all of us kind of began to see that shift, it feels like, when things like YouTube Originals and VidCon and Playlist Live began. But despite us seeing this transformation from just a person with a camera to someone being classified as a YouTuber, I still feel like it wasn't easy for most people to jump in and begin doing this. And I think it's because, there's just a higher barrier to entry with YouTube. You had to learn how to record and edit, and you might have needed the money to get the equipment or to get the materials that you needed to be in your videos. So I feel like when Vine came out, it was a slightly more accessible option, considering it was just an app on our phone and you were only posting kind of shorter videos. However, I think it boxed people into creating only funny videos, and even though it did produce a couple stars, I feel like most of them didn't have a ton of staying power. Most Vine stars kind of left as quickly as they came. And then the same thing kind of happened with Musical.ly, right? Musical.ly, once again, was accessible in it being an app on our phone, but I feel like it just boxed people into creating a certain type of video. And those stars that it made, I feel like most of them kind of came and went. Also with Musical.ly, I feel like older members of Gen Z really weren't on that as much. I definitely feel like that was more for the younger crowd, and because this video is about Gen Z, I still feel like that's important to note. But I just know, like, for me personally, most of my peers, like, were not on Musical.ly. In fact, I remember right before, we were going into the 2-week lockdown, that there was a kid in one of my college classes, and he was talking about Charli D'Amelio. And he was like, oh, do you guys know who this is? And we were like, we've never heard of that girl. We don't even know what TikTok is. What are you talking about? Let me just say that I'm not a huge fan of TikTok. I want to just put that out there. I really do not like that app. I've never really quite loved that app for a multitude of reasons. But I do think that the one benefit that TikTok had over Vine and over Musical.ly is the fact that it was the most like YouTube, in the sense where you could kind of post whatever you wanted. And yes, I know people initially were on TikTok posting dance videos, but I feel like very quickly we started to see how that could change. So if you take YouTube, right, the best of YouTube, which is its diversity, and then you take like the best of Vine and Musical.ly, which is its accessibility, you put those together and now you have the perfect app in which almost anybody can get on and do any type of content they want, with the chance of it going viral. And when everything was said and done, that's exactly what happened. With the condition that we were in 2020, of us all being locked at home and not having much to do, I feel like that, in conjunction with TikTok being the perfect app to propel people into stardom, plus all of the years of conditioning that we had, been through with TV shows, with music, with movies, with games, I just felt like 2020 was truly the perfect time in human history and the easiest time in human history to become a star. And once people began seeing, like, hey, it's not even just fame that's going on here. It's like these people are now having, monetary opportunities and just opportunities in general to change their lives. I feel like people kind of threw out the rhetoric of like, be careful of your digital footprint, right? You don't want your jobs to see this. You don't want anybody, seeing something online that you can't take away. And I feel like people kind of just disregarded that, either because they weren't thinking about that, or also because it's like, why would I care about what an employer thinks? Like, this is the new employer. And when you combine that with just everything that transpired after 2020, which was, people were at home, and a lot of people are just starting to realize a lot of things that they would not have been able to had they been at work, which was, some of these jobs did not give a crap about us. In fact, most of them, it felt, didn't give a crap about us. And it's like, why would I go to work every single day, working a 9 to 5, where I'm not even making enough money, add inflation onto that, when I can just go online and post videos and just do whatever and have a seemingly great life? And let me just put a pin in this. This isn't to say that making stuff online is easy. I can only imagine just how much time and effort a lot of stuff online does take. And there was like a really great video from like Tiffany Ferguson a couple of months ago talking about this. I just think the one thing with digital content is that, you can work super hard here, or you can work super hard at like a 9 to 5. And the biggest difference that I feel like we all see is that ceiling for how much money you can make doing something online is completely different than your average 9 to 5. But going back to my point, with all that being said, right, with all of the layers since we were kids kind of just being stacked and stacked and stacked to create like this perfect storm of us wanting to be famous, I think we need to talk about why that matters. So on a personal level, I feel like the biggest reason that this matters, right, the pursuit of fame for the sake of being famous, is because, one, I think we're just seeing higher rates of narcissistic traits across the board. I'm not diagnosing anybody, I can't do that, and I'm not saying that people are full-blown narcissists, but I definitely think just the way that our culture has transpired, we have so many people now who kind of just are becoming obsessed with themselves, having like this main character syndrome where they feel like life is kind of only about them in a way, and that their actions only really impact them, and that's just simply not the case. I also feel like you're just more at risk for, how people say, like, selling your soul. And I mean this in more of like a practical sense, where it's like, if you only care about being famous, right, because you have this desire to be seen, to be known, you're just more likely, in my opinion, to maybe do some things that, like, you know deep down you probably don't really agree with, or you know could be potentially harmful to yourself or others, but you're doing it because it's like you just want to be seen. And I feel like this is a scale, right? This is a spectrum. Like, you can do something that it's like, hey, I'm going to, dress in this way, even though I really hate it, but I know it'll get me views, right? That's kind of, I would say, more on like the spectrum, on like the mild side. Versus now you're doing something that could really end up harming you physically. And I think the biggest example of this that I always think about is that man a couple years ago who intentionally crashed a plane for views. You don't know what I'm talking about. This man, his name is Trevor Jacob, and back in 2021, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison for crashing a plane. I don't believe it hurt anybody, and then he lied about it during the investigation, and this whole thing was just like a setup for views and attention online. I completely understand that this is like, a very extreme case. This is like kind of like a one-off situation, but my point still stands that if you are so desperate for fame and attention that you will go to great lengths to achieve it. It's very fortunate that he didn't end up hurting anybody else, which takes me to my next point, which is how this pursuit of fame for the sake of it can hurt others in our community. Once again, like all things or most things, it's a spectrum, right? So you have on like the mild side of impacting others in the community. I feel like this looks like being like a public nuisance in a way, right? Like the people who are making videos and it's very annoying to the public and it can just, cause a scene, cause a little bit of a commotion. It might not physically be harming anybody, but it's also just like, hey man, like who was really trying to deal with this? I'm just trying to go to the grocery store. On the other side of the spectrum, you really are harming people in your community. And I always think about family vloggers. And I mean, there's so much out there on family vloggers, and I'm not going to fully get into that in this video, but so many of them, honestly, all of them are putting their children at risk because they're putting them in the public eye. These channels have millions and millions of views and followers. And, if you are into internet culture at all and you've research things about family vloggers, the types of things that are kind of behind the scenes at play in these situations, which is extremely dangerous and unsettling and disturbing. And I don't even want to fully get into that because I'm honestly just going to get very angry. But it's like when you just solely want to be seen and you solely want this fame, like you can really jeopardize like the safety of people around you. And I'm sorry, but like no amount of fame and attention should be worth any of that. And that kind of leads me to, my last point is how this impacts, our audience, right? The audience or society at large. I feel like when you are not really able to conceptualize the audience that you have, like how many people are really truly watching your videos, holding on to your every word, trusting what you have to say, really taking your influence seriously, I just feel like you're more likely to push products or sponsorships or ideas that can, once again, on that spectrum, be wildly untrue to very detrimental and very harmful. Sometimes I think about, if these people were in front of a crowd of that size, would they still be doing the same thing? Maybe it's kind of easier in a sense because they can't actually conceptualize just how many people are watching and listening and going to do what they're saying. So what can we do, right? I feel like a lot of times, we talk about things like this, or we just talk about things in general, and then it's like when it comes to what we can actually do, it's kind of just like nothing, exit the video, bye. Like when in reality it's like, no, I feel like there actually are some things that we can do, and it's not always going to be the easiest thing. It's not always going to be an immediate type of change, but I do feel like if enough people began to do them, it could move the needle in a way that is a bit more positive. So on a personal level, I feel like any individual, right, who is like desiring fame for the sake of being famous. Once again, not like, hey, I want to be an athlete. And if I'm a professional athlete, that so happens to come with, fame, notoriety, money. But I just want to be an athlete because I love the game. You know what I'm saying? I'm not talking about stuff like that. I'm talking about, I don't care what I gotta do, who I gotta do, anything like that. Like, I just want to be seen. I want to be known. That's what I mean. I feel like when this is occurring, if you are not actually looking at the root cause, right? Why am I trying to do this? Why am I getting ready to go online and do anything to be seen? If you just are not validating yourself internally. Or number two, let's say you haven't had healthy validation from others. Because as much as, we're in a culture now where it's like we have to practice self-love and self-esteem, there is a component that does have to do with other people. If you were a kid and like you were not taken care of the way that you deserve to have been taken care of, or maybe you don't feel like you have community or people who love and who see you for who you actually are, I can understand and empathize with someone who feels like they need to go online and do whatever so that they can have some feeling of adoration. I do understand that. And it makes me really sad because it's like, I wish these people could have just gotten the love that they deserve to have gotten. But even though that's not somebody's fault, I do think that unfortunately, sometimes things happen to us that wasn't our fault, but now we have to take responsibility. And so I feel like if people question, their motives and find the underlying reason, why am I going after this? Why am I doing this? And they begin to unpack that, maybe then they'll be like, hey, I actually don't need to be famous and jump around online and do a whole bunch of stupid stuff. I really just need like community, or I really just, I need to be validated in this certain area of my life in a very healthy and normal way. I think that could help a lot. Just honestly having these transparent conversations with ourselves. I also think that if we all are kind of limiting our screen time, right, and we're actually doing things in the outside world with community, with other people, and we're once again, receiving that healthy validation from others, that healthy love and support, not like we're solely, banking on other people to fill our cups. But I just see how that, in a couple of ways, being less on our phones can just help us to not care so much about fame because, we're not scrolling constantly and seeing that 24/7, but also like help us to like touch grass like in a way and to be like, this is what really matters, not X, Y, and Z. I also feel like we need to like talk to the youth. Like I feel like such like an old person for saying that, like, oh, we need to talk to the children, but like genuinely I do feel like we have to talk to the kids about like, hey man, I know that like you want to do this because this is what's extremely popular nowadays and this is who you're looking up to, and kind of just being like honest about what being online entails. And once again, maybe those kids are feeling like, hey, like I want to be online and I want to be famous because they're not getting things at home or they don't really have friends, etc., etc. And I just feel like talking to them will really help to kind of like unpack a lot of that, because I'm sure I'm not the only person who's heard how like so many young kids now, it's like their dream job to be an influencer and to be a content creator or a Twitch streamer. And I think we just really need to talk to them and like see what's up. And finally, I think like on a larger, level with the audience and with society, I really think that we need to kind of just be mindful of how many people are really watching us. Like I've been saying, I just feel like when people are not really able to conceptualize just how many eyes are on them, not to say that every single view, that person is taking you super seriously and gonna listen and do everything you say, but still, I'm sure enough of those people actually are. I feel like people might be like, hey, okay, if this many people are actually watching me and this many people fills up a movie theater or it fills up a football stadium or it fills up the state of Wisconsin, I don't know, then they might be like, maybe let me not say this. Maybe let me not promote this when I know this brand doesn't have these people's best interests in mind. And of course, will people still do what people are gonna do and push stuff that they don't agree with and they know is wrong and yada yada yada? Sure, because at the end of the day, everything online is just a reflection of people in real life. There's always going to be people who do wrong because they don't care. But I do feel like some people who have kind of been like swept up and just trying to get a bag and trying to do the best for themselves, they might be like, this is actually how many people are watching me. Let me be a little bit more mindful with what I'm saying and what I'm promoting. And then finally, I think we also just need to be mindful of like who we're giving influence, who we're giving platforms, because at the end of the day, we are the audience. And if we all just one day stop viewing certain people, then there goes their influence and their power over us. And I know that sounds like easier said and done, but I still feel like we do have some responsibility of being like, you know what, I'm sick and tired of this creator, saying or doing X, Y, and Z. I'm just going to stop engaging with what they're putting out. And that can move the needle slightly closer to, encouraging people to just pursue fame for the sake of fame and not really caring about what that responsibility entails. And with that, thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what your views on fame are. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.